you. Well, thank you all very, very much. I wanted to use this opportunity to outline what I think is a very, very serious growing challenge in the Middle East that occurs at 3 or 4 different layers. So that this will be not a simple speech, because I think the region is not a simple region anymore. And let me say that I believe that if you look at the totality of what President Obama is doing, that in many ways this may be becoming the most dangerous presidency in modern times. There's a complete unwillingness to deal honestly with threats that are very real, and that if the worst things happen, will mean that terrorists will have access to nuclear weapons in a way which will be a direct mortal threat to American cities. And I've been very struck with the unwillingness of the Obama administration to tell the truth about the threats that we're faced with, to such a degree that they have in effect censored even the national security system so that it can't talk honestly about what the threats are. And let's be very clear. There are a series of radical Islamist threats that come in a variety of forms. And I believe that nobody in the current system is prepared to talk honestly about how real and how deep this threat is. Let me just give you a couple of examples. First of all, when you learn that Pakistan had bin Laden in a military city, in a large compound, about a mile from the National Defense University, it's very hard to draw any conclusion except that elements of the Pakistani government were protecting the person who was the most wanted terrorist in the world. If you doubted that, the recent action of the Pakistani government in arresting the person who helped the United States. They didn't go out and investigate who was hiding him. They didn't investigate who was protecting him. They investigated to find out who had turned him in. And this raises a very fundamental question. I know we've had a very powerful focus on Iran, but I just want to raise this question. The Pakistanis have somewhere between 100 and 200 nuclear weapons. They have already existing delivery systems. This is a government which clearly has a very significant faction, which is at a minimum anti-American, and at a maximum dedicated to a fairly radical Islamist viewpoint. And I think you have to ask yourself, how much do we really understand about what's happening in Pakistan, given that for years they were hiding bin Laden inside a military city. Furthermore, you have to, I think, look very seriously at the failure of our intelligence system. Since 1975, starting with the Church Committee, the Congress has consistently weakened and undermined and circumvented the process of gathering intelligence. So that we have a whole series of rules that make it very, very difficult to have genuine covert intelligence gathering. The result is, in a wide number of countries, we actually rely on the host country for intelligence. So we rely on the Pakistanis. We rely on the Iraqis. We rely on the Egyptians. And the question you have to ask yourself is, why would you believe that they're telling you what you need to know as opposed to what they want you to know? And this has been this requires, I think, a very major overhaul of the laws that relate to intelligence and to intelligence gathering by the United States. Now, so start with this understanding. We are faced with opponents in multiple countries who are knit together by a largely religiously driven imperative. And while that's politically incorrect to say, it's a fact, and it's important because people who are religiously driven take much greater risks than people who are purely secular. One of the reasons deterrence worked with the Soviet Union is you were dealing with communists who were atheists. And so they couldn't exactly offer martyrdom because they had no place to go. And so you had very few people volunteer in the Soviet Empire to go and be martyrs. But if you believe that your particular God wants you to kill people and is willing to give you a heavenly reward, you have a totally different problem. And one of the great challenges of the Obama administration is their unwillingness to think through the logic and to be honest with the American people about the scale of the threat. Somebody who's prepared to put a bomb on their body and walk in a grocery store or a restaurant or a bus and kill themselves as long as they get to kill you would be thrilled to have a nuclear weapon so that they could maximize the damage. And let me be quite explicit about this. We were all shocked on 9/11 when 3,100 Americans were killed by deliberate terrorist attack in New York and in Washington and on a United Airlines flight. But with a nuclear weapon, you would add 2 zeros at a minimum. You'd be talking about 300,000 dead and maybe as many as 500,000 casualties, additional wounded. Now, nobody wants to confront that. Nobody in the national establishment is prepared to say, if we really live in a world that has that kind of threat, what should we in fact be doing? What should a real homeland security be like in terms of recovery and response? What would the scale of medical facilities be needed in terms of that kind of a threat? And yet it's real. It's real, first of all, in terms of the potential of a Pakistani weapon leaking. It's real, second, in terms of the possibility of the North Koreans selling it. And it's real, third, in terms of the Iranians acquiring weapons which they would enthusiastically share. Which gets us to, I think, the greatest immediate existential threat, which is the Iranian dictatorship. There have been a series of articles recently that the Israelis may conclude in the near future that they have no choice except to launch a military operation designed to dramatically slow down and disrupt the Iranian nuclear system. And I wanted to take today to make clear where I stand on this. Because I think this could become, at any moment, a major challenge. And I think that Secretary of Defense Panetta has been peculiarly unhelpful in the way he's framed it. We had, remember, the come to the table period where he was pounding the table and explaining that if only the Israelis were reasonable. No mention of the 11 missiles that were fired into Israel the preceding month. No mention of why Hamas should come to the table. No mention of why Hezbollah should come to the table. No mention of why the Muslim Brotherhood should come to the table. Totally one-sided diatribe against the only democracy involved in the negotiations. Well, now you have a similar thing. You have the Secretary of Defense saying he thinks that the Israelis might strike. He didn't then turn and say, therefore the Iranians should take down their program. And I think this is the first message to Iran. If the Ahmadinejad dictatorship is determined to move forward, it should understand that it is inviting a substantial military attack in order to stop it from getting nuclear weapons. And the burden should be on the Iranian government for having been deliberately provocative. This is, after all, a government whose leader has said openly, publicly, he wants to eliminate Israel from the face of the earth. Now, the history of the last century was, when dictators say things like that, you should believe them. And this is my message for the American people. No Israeli prime minister can morally accept the risk of a second Holocaust. Period. Three nuclear weapons in the right place in Israel is literally, in a matter of seconds, a second Holocaust. I mean, just look at the numbers, look at how dense the population is, and understand the level of disaster we're describing. no Israeli prime minister could enforce their oath of office if they ran that risk. And so I would say unequivocally, if the Israelis reach a point where they conclude that their very survival is at stake, the United States should be supportive. We should provide them whatever intelligence they need. We should ensure that they are in fact understand that they will have sympathy for the United States, not condemnation. And we should tell the world, you cannot expect somebody who is a Holocaust denier, who is openly threatening to annihilate a state, to be allowed to get nuclear weapons, and we would completely understand if Israel decided that they had to disrupt the Iranian nuclear program, period. In addition, the United States policy should be to use every means short of war to undermine and replace the Ahmadinejad dictatorship. Our commitment should be, just as we did with the Soviet Union, to use every kind of covert operation, to use funding for the dissidents, to provide for a very intense propaganda campaign, to seek methods to further disrupt the Iranian economy, and to create the environment in which the people of Iran replace the dictatorship. We will never be safe, not in the United States, not in Europe, not in Israel, as long as the Ahmadinejad dictatorship is in place. And frankly, even a military strike only slows down the process as long as the same dictatorship is there. And therefore, we should adopt a policy that we are committed to replacing the regime. We want to do it as peacefully and as nonviolently as possible, but we want to become the ally and the friend of every dissident Iranian. Remember, this is a country in which only 51% of the country speaks Farsi. There are huge ethnic and complexities in Iranian society. And every poll we've ever seen says the younger Iranians deeply dislike the regime. And President Obama lost a great opportunity several years ago when there were millions of people taking to the streets seeking an Iranian spring. But there was no interest in the administration in encouraging the people of Iran to replace the administration. So I think that should be our second goal. We should be quite clear about the fact that we want to, in fact, have a new government in Iran, and that we regard the current government as a permanent threat to the United States and a permanent danger to civilization. Our third goal should be to open a large national debate about what threatens us. I mean, it is truly astounding that you have an administration, the Obama administration, which refuses to even use the words radical Islamist, which behaves as though terrorism is a random behavior, and literally has censored national security documents to eliminate accurate facts, so that when a psychiatrist at Fort Hood kills 13 Americans and wounds 30 others while yelling Allahu Akbar and having in his wallet warrior of Allah, the administration manages to write a report with no mention of radical Islamists. Now, I mean, that's a level of willful dishonesty that is astonishing. When the State Department meets with the Organization of Islamic Countries to talk about censoring Americans in order to protect Islam, there's something really profoundly wrong with the entire Obama administration's approach to this issue. And every American should be deeply offended that our young men and women are risking their lives while the United States government refuses to be honest about people who are trying to kill them. I mean, let me be quite clear. I do not believe that a Norwegian Rotary Club is a primary threat. I don't believe that a Japanese Kiwanis Club is a primary threat. I mean, I think that to try to describe the network trying to kill us without describing the network is one of the most, it's as though we opened the Cold War by saying you weren't allowed to use the word communism. Now explain the Soviet behavior. I mean, that's literally how bad this is. And yet the other side of the coin is we don't have a good strategy there. I want to be quite clear. I don't believe anybody in Washington or anybody at any of the think tanks has a good strategy. And the reason is simple. This is a really hard problem. This is a problem which could go on for a very long time. And it may not be susceptible to military solutions. And we need to really confront how hard this is. We are now where the U.S. was in 1946, when people, frankly, didn't have an answer. And what we need, and this is where the Obama dishonesty and the intellectual dishonesty of the administration is so destructive, we need an open, honest national debate. We need to confront the fact that the Saudis, not the Iranians, the Saudis, are the largest funders of teaching hatred on the planet. We need to confront the fact that in the Egyptian election, the Muslim Brotherhood was the largest single bloc, but the second largest bloc is more radical than the Brotherhood. So their pressure is going to be more radical, not less radical. And we have to confront the fact that the leaders of Hamas have a very simple principle. Quote, not a single Jew will be left. Now, why the United States talks about a peace process involving an organization whose publicly stated goal is the annihilation of the other party. How do you have peace with somebody who says not a single one of you will be left? This is nonsense. And that's why we need to reset the entire conversation for the region. Let me pick up one last topic, which actually has a very big domestic component, but it's an area where I wish I could get every person who cares about Israel actively, aggressively engaged. If we really want to strategically reset the table in the region, the number one strategic goal of the United States should be total energy independence from the Middle East. The morning we produce enough oil and gas that we don't care what happens in the Straits of Hormuz, China has a problem. We don't. India has a problem. We don't. And the morning we produce enough oil that no American president will ever again bow to a Saudi king, we will have broken loose. So, while I'm talking about foreign policy, I want to take a brief detour. Because as a historian, I like to use facts, not theories. It is a fact that we have discovered an enormous amount of oil in North Dakota. It is a fact that the only reason we have discovered an enormous amount of oil in North Dakota is it was on private land, and liberals couldn't block it being developed. It's a fact that we've found so much oil in North Dakota that the unemployment rate is 3.5%, and that's probably an exaggeration. There are 16,000 to 18,000 jobs that are available for people in North Dakota right this minute. But they're technical jobs that require knowledge of the oil industry. But so they actually have, they need more workers. It's not that whoever's unemployed is not trying very hard, and what they really need are people who are trained correctly. And these are $60,000 to $80,000 a year jobs. The amount of money they're now producing in North Dakota is so great that the state government has had 7 consecutive tax cuts and has a multi-billion-dollar rainy day fund. Now here's why North Dakota matters. It turns out that there is massively more oil than the U.S. Geological Survey thought. And in fact, the primary developer of North Dakota believes that the true amount of oil is currently unknown. Because every time they go looking, they find more. Now, the reason this matters is it destroys the theory of peak oil. It suggests that new science, new technology, new ways of exploring, new ways of actually developing, both in natural gas and in oil, are opening up entire areas we've never been able to get to before. The Monterey Formation in California, for example, potentially has 80 billion barrels of oil, an enormous amount. It is very likely that we have now moved from 10 years ago, we thought we had about 7 years supply of natural gas, and because of new technology and new science, we now think we have 125 years supply of natural gas. We went from people planning to build liquid natural gas ports where we would bring the natural gas from the Persian Gulf, to now we're talking about building natural gas facilities to ship the natural gas to China. All of this is within less than 10 years. So I want to suggest to you that the right national strategy for the Middle East should include as a major component an American energy policy designed to make us completely independent of purchasing any oil from the Middle East. So we could say to the Iranians, you want to close the Straits of Hormuz? Talk to the Chinese, don't talk to us. And we could basically become the world's reserve supplier. There are already studies that indicate that by the end of this decade, we will be the largest oil producer in the world, passing both Russia and China. And that's with an administration which is against oil. Remember, the Obama administration is so grotesquely against oil, they actually had an attorney, a U.S. attorney in North Dakota, filed a lawsuit against the oil companies on behalf of, I think it was 8 migratory birds that they alleged had been killed. Now, I mean, compare the number of birds killed by wind, none of whom would get sued by the Obama administration because wind is politically correct, but oil is politically incorrect. This is the kind of nonsense that we currently live on. So here's my proposition from the standpoint of a Gingrich presidency. On the very first day, we would authorize the Keystone Pipeline to bring Canadian oil into the United States so that we'd begin the process of getting away from Middle Eastern oil. We would also authorize the development offshore of oil and natural gas. We currently only open up 13% of our potential offshore areas. 87% are locked up. And we would go back to allowing people in the Gulf of Mexico to develop in a rapid and expeditious way. We would overhaul the Department of Interior, which is currently blocking the development of new sources. And we would open up federal land. Remember, we own 69% of Alaska. Alaska is 1.5 times, or is 2 times the size of Texas. So 69% means we basically own about 1.5 areas the size of Texas. So you could give the environmentalist a half of Texas in Alaska, and you would have an area the size of Texas to develop. I mean, I believe if you combine that, we have several specific proposals for a 12.5% corporate tax, for 0 capital gains, and for 100% expensing, so that any new investment gets written off in 1 year to maximize the development of the newest, best equipment, so our workers are the best prepared in the world. I think you take that package, you suddenly have an explosion of American oil and gas production. You have the following 3 things happen. We are essentially liberated from worrying about the Middle East, and we can be dramatically more direct with the Saudis about their behavior. Second, we are in a position that we dramatically help our own national economy, because with that scale of development, you're going to create well over 1 million new jobs. You're going to create tremendous opportunities for people on the profit side. All of that's going to lead to more federal revenue, by the way, as people go to work and as companies make profit. So you're actually going to increase federal revenue without having to raise taxes. The third side effect is our goal should be to bring the cost of gasoline down to $2.50 a gallon. Now, this is not a wild number. I just want to defend this for a minute so you understand how rational this is. When I was Speaker of the House, the average price of gasoline over 4 years was $1.13. When Obama was sworn in, the price of gasoline was $1.89. I mean, this idea that you have to automatically have $4, $5, $6, $7 gasoline. You know, Secretary Chu, before he became secretary, said publicly he really wanted gasoline prices to reach European levels. That'd be $9 a gallon. The Obama Environmental Protection Agency has a proposal in that would raise the price of gasoline 25 cents a gallon just through one particular regulation. I mean, there's a conscious, deliberate effort to minimize access to transportation. And I want to suggest to you that we have the potential to have a program for American energy which fits our national security interest, fits our economic interest, and would fit the pocketbook of almost every American. And those kind of efforts to bring together grand strategies. Because if the United States by the end of this decade was genuinely independent, our leverage in negotiating in the Middle East would be radically higher. If we're genuinely independent, the guy who is the biggest developer in North Dakota believes that if you looked at all federal land and all federal offshore capabilities, the royalties over the next generation would be $18 trillion. That would literally be enough that if you controlled spending, you could pay off the national debt without raising taxes. This is just because the U.S. government, every time you pump, a barrel of oil or you pump 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas, if it's on federal land, the U.S. government gets a royalty. So I think that we have to have a much bigger, bolder approach to thinking about strategy. So just to recap, in the very short run, if the Israelis decide they have no choice, I believe the United States has to back them, and we have to recognize that no Israeli prime minister can be asked to risk the survival of his country. In a longer period, we should have an explicit strategy of replacing the dictatorship in Iran. We need a national dialogue about radical Islam and the threats from radical Islamists, and we have to confront the fact that it's going to be controversial, but it needs to be said. And finally, we need an American energy strategy that is designed to use all of the American energy assets so that we genuinely once again become what we were in World War II, the world's largest supplier of energy at relatively low cost, which automatically rebuilds our manufacturing base and automatically enables the American people to have a far wider range of quality of life and a far wider range of choices about their lifestyle. I think that's the kind of program that actually allows us to once again be the leading country in the world and have a sense of confidence both about our economic future and about our national security future. And I appreciate you allowing me to outline these kind of ideas. And I look forward to getting to meet each one of you personally. Thank you all very, very much.